This podcast is part of the Game and Entertainment Network. Visit tgenetwork.net to find the latest episodes from all our shows.
You're listening to Beyond Bossfights, gaming, technology, movies, and more. Now, here's your host, Braxwolf.
Welcome to Beyond Bossfights episode 29. Today I have two guests that help me tackle a somewhat sensitive subject. Andang of Lotro Players and the Players Alliance Network, and Beej from the Geek to Geek podcast are intimately familiar with dealing with anxiety and the toll that it can take on the mind, body, and relationships. One of the challenges of doing a show on anxiety is that it can be tough to find guests who are willing to talk about it. So right up front, I'd like to say how grateful I am to Andang and Beej for agreeing to join me today to share their stories. We'll talk about the journey to diagnosing mental health issues, how anxiety can manifest itself, and the additional difficulties encountered when creating and consuming online content. I think this is a very important episode, and I'm really glad you've chosen to join us for it. Hey everybody, today we have with us a couple of special guests. First of all, I want to reintroduce Andang, who was on Beyond Bossfights episode 1, and he's with us again to talk about our topic tonight. Andang, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And also we have another special guest from the Geek to Geek podcast, Professor Beej. He's also going to help us out with this topic tonight. Thanks for being here for the first time, Beej.
Oh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. I was waving and realized I wasn't on video camera at this point.
No video on this show. Sorry. Maybe if you were on Andang's YouTube channel, everybody would have seen that. So, Andang, as I mentioned, has been on the show before, so I'm not going to let him do his definitive gaming history. I'm going to shut him down at this point, going to turn off his mic, and we're going to head over to Professor Beej so he can tell everybody what his gaming history is and maybe some of his geekery history and where he's come from. So, Beej, go ahead and take it away.
Well, in terms of video games and gaming history, I think all of them. Does that count? I started, I think in 1985, really wanting a regular Nintendo Entertainment System. I was 2 years old, and my family was poor, and we couldn't afford one, but I saw it on TV with this robot, and I knew that I had to have it. And so my cousin gave me his Atari 2600 at that point. And I had a shoebox full of Atari cartridges, a black and white 13-inch TV that my parents had won in a giveaway, and an Atari, did I say Atari 2600? No, and then the Atari 2600 itself with joysticks that it came with. And that set me up for life at that point. I just went through, played these as a 2-year-old, figuring out things like Moon Patrol and Adventure, and until I could get an NES. So just from a very, very ridiculously early age, I've had a controller in my hand. I remember, growing up, my parents playing Duck Hunt at night when I was asleep, waking up to having high score competitions on the refrigerator. So it was an environment that very much didn't penalize me for being a gamer at all. So I was always involved in doing stuff like that. I wanted the Nintendo 64 so much that my school had a giveaway that I've talked about it on the Geek to Geek cast before, where I'm still emotionally scarred for not winning the first Nintendo 64 of anybody I know, and it was Benjamin Parker's grandparents who won it, and I still know who it was, and that was like 20 years ago, and I'm like, this makes me a little bit pitiful and pathetic for knowing that still, but I'm like, that's how much it affected me because of being a gamer.
They probably still have it. It's probably still in the box.
They probably do. I don't think it was in the box because Ben always rubbed it in my face that he was playing Mario 64 and I wasn't. And but that's what happens when you're like 7th grade with those kind of rivalries at that point. Let me think. I played World of Warcraft for a decade. I hologrinded a Jedi up in Star Wars Galaxies before the NGE came out, so I was proud of that one. I don't know if I should be again because of the amount of time that took. Ultima Online was really Ultima Online and Diablo, the original Diablo, were my first online experiences, and pretty much just every MMO, every console, every major game I've been a part of, I've wanted to be a part of, even if not a part of the actual community. I've tried out and just dipped my toe in everywhere. That the current system generation of systems is the first generation that I have not had all of the systems at any given time at the same time, rather, where I love doing it. And now I'm moving into probably a more responsible adult way of gaming where, you wait a little bit for the prices to go down and then you grab the really good games instead of playing all of them. But that was why I joked about all of them being my history, because I pretty much did everything as it came out growing up because it was one of my only hobbies. That and just geekery in general, action figures, Star Wars is my big thing. Like if we were on video, you would see the Yoda statue behind me that I have with latex skin and hair and everything I got as a Christmas gift. So pretty much anything geeky I'm a part of. So that's me.
Awesome. Now I heard you mention, you said I think you were 2 years old when the Nintendo came out.
Yeah.
Did you actually have the robot for the Nintendo?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, it was more expensive. And when we actually got the NES, it was, I think, the following Christmas when I got the Nintendo. I got the Atari when I was 2, and then it came out, and it was the following year I got the NES. The bundles with Rob in it the robot were way more expensive, so I didn't get that one.
I don't think I know anybody who actually had that, although everybody saw it in the commercials.
Yep, I played with it though. Years later, I started playing with it, and I remember playing Gyromite with Rob, and he was the worst partner for gaming I've ever had in my life. Like, you look back and you're like, man, playing with a robot would have been awesome. It's like, no, it wasn't. He was bad at it. He's like when you give your like your little 2-year-old nephew the controls, and you just want to be like, press the button, kid, press it faster, press it faster. No, that's the way he was playing with that robot.
The AI wasn't quite there yet.
Mm-mm. Not quite the way it is today that we're used to with AI and bot opponents.
Also showing my age a little, back in my day, the NES was just called the Nintendo, which is why I called it that. I still call it that, and I have a hard time making my mouth say NES because it was just, that's what it was. That was the only Nintendo there was at the time.
Yeah. And I don't know, for years, whenever I was a teenager when the PlayStation came out, and it took a long time because that was really the first non-Nintendo system out. There was Sega too, but I mean, the PlayStation was the one that really took off and became truly mainstream, that people still called it playing Nintendo, especially around here, that if you were sitting in your room playing your PlayStation, our parents would be like, oh, they're in there playing Nintendo. It's like, we're playing PlayStation. And yeah, it's just Nintendo.
Well, thank you for the intro. The main topic is not quite so jovial. I mean, it is what we make of it, but it's a little bit of a heavier thing, I think, and it's something that I've wanted to tackle for a while. And really, Andang gave me the courage to go ahead and seek this topic out, because he volunteered a few weeks ago and said, if you ever want to do this topic, I would be willing to come back on the show. And I thought, well, that's great. I have a guest. So, and it wasn't much longer after that I heard you, Beej, mention that on one of your shows that this is something that you struggled with as well. Today, we're going to tackle the topic of anxiety. And the reason I think it's important is because I hear so many people through my contacts on Twitter and through other gaming channels that when I interact with folks, I hear people say, such things like, I'm so introverted, or I have such problems with anxiety, or I suffer with depression. I know these are all different things, but we're just really going to focus in on anxiety at this point, because to be honest, for the both of you, when I heard that this is something that you struggle with, I was kind of shocked, because you both seem to be very outgoing type people, and this isn't something that I would picture you struggling with. So I wanted to first ask you each individually. I'll start with you, Andang, I guess, is have you been officially diagnosed with an anxiety disorder?
Kind of. I've gone to therapy and have been told that I have anxiety by the therapist, but I don't know what officially, how official capacity that actually is. They're a licensed therapist, so I don't know.
I would say that probably counts.
But I was never given anxiety medicine or anything like that. And I didn't realize that I had anxiety. But looking back, I realized that. But the first time that I really realized it was actually junior year of high school. I missed a month of school because of anxiety. We didn't know what was wrong with me. And it was absolutely terrifying, not just the anxiety, but just not knowing what was wrong with me. And I probably had a stomach bug or something that happened as well, but I just had so much anxiety that it just completely took over my life, and I ended up missing a whole month of school. and had to make all that up. And we kept going to all these different doctors, and none of them told what was wrong with me, until we finally went to a therapist, and they said, well, you have anxiety type of stuff. So
at the time, what did you think was going on? Did you think it was just some kind of a physical ailment?
Yes, because I was getting really, really sick and lost 10 pounds within like 2 weeks, and was eating more meals than I'd ever ate before, and just felt like I was out of energy all the time.
So, Beej, I've heard you have said that you are actually taking medication for your anxiety. So I assume that means you've been officially diagnosed.
We're working on it. Only very recently, actually officially diagnosed, kind of like he said. I saw a psychiatrist for the first time 2 weeks ago. And that's really where, in my understanding, like, at least according to government and, sick leave paperwork stuff, is what my employers needed was from a psychiatrist. But I went to my DO, and got my primary care physician and gave me medicine right at a year ago. And I've been seeing a counselor over that same time. And they told me that I had anxiety. And then the psychiatrist last week, we had also thought that maybe it was bipolar 2. And when I saw him, he said that it was severe anxiety, and probably we're working under the assumption of predominantly impulsive ADHD as well. So kind of to go all together. But when I saw a psychiatrist, he started really narrowing it down a lot more than the counselor could. Because, that's his thing. And it's kind of like yes and no, maybe. We're working on a diagnosis because it's really, really hard to get an official diagnosis on any kind of mental health issue, which is one of the big problems with it, because so many people think it's kind of this ethereal thing that, you can get better and get over, rather than, the health issues of there's something physiological in my brain making me do this, where it's super hard to do. And he talked to me a lot about the reasons it wasn't bipolar 2, which I didn't know was a thing, by the way. I didn't know there were 2 different kinds of bipolar disorder, and explained to me that because of some of the symptoms that I wasn't having, it lent more to the specific and more general as well, generalized anxiety disorder instead of that. So, kind of question mark.
Okay. Yeah. I think this is probably a good point to make, because a lot of times it is a real journey to figure out what it is that's affecting you. Mm-hmm. You mentioned you got some new medication. You've been on some medication. What was that process like deciding? Was there any kind of decision process as to whether we should take medication or whether we shouldn't, or were there different things that you had to decide between trying? Because I know when my son was diagnosed with ADHD, there was a big conversation between my wife and I as to whether we should proceed with any kind of medication or try some alternate types of therapy.
I delayed going and getting medication pretty much literally until the moment I couldn't stand life anymore. I was having a really hard time. About 3 years ago, my wife had an insomnia episode that kept her awake for roughly 3 months. And it was really terrible. And that spawned a lot of anxiety in her. And as she started dealing with it and going to the therapist and psychiatrist, figuring out, how can I sleep again? We realized that it was anxiety induced, and the stuff that she was going through, I realized, that's kind of what I've always done, but I always just thought of it as feeling weird was the way that I always put it, was, I just feel weird for a little while, and then, I can move on with it. And I realized that I probably have some anxiety issues too. And then just some stuff happened last summer, right as I was going back into school. On top of having a new supervisor, there was a lot of things in my personal life going on where it all just kind of the bottom fell out of my life. And I realized that after dealing with all of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I'd put off getting medication solely because of weight gain, that I was so afraid of weight gain because of, you probably know, I don't know if everybody out there does, I did a significant amount of weight loss. I lost like 150 pounds. So that became such a major part of my life that the idea of getting on a medicine to even make me feel better, that may potentially make me gain even a fraction of that back, was enough to keep me from getting it until the absolute moment I decided I could not live like this anymore. Called my wife and went immediately to my campus's nurse practitioner, and she was able to get me on Prozac before my general practitioner could see me, and got a different one worked out. But yeah, it was hard.
So, Andang, I'm going to ask you, how does it manifest itself? How does this anxiety issue manifest itself from a day-to-day perspective? I mean, for those of us who don't understand but are trying to understand, how would you describe it to us?
So, describing anxiety, it's essentially like having your worst fear manifest itself every second that it's not necessarily every second, but imagine your absolute worst fear all condensed into a second, and then that dragged out over a long period of time, and not knowing when your anxiety is going to be happening. It can be something that shouldn't be triggering at all. It's not anything that you should even be remotely worried about, and yet that can be the thing that you're most anxious about.
And you can completely understand that there is no reason to be anxious about this. You can understand it as a trivial, inconsequential thing that is in your life, and your body is still reacting that way. You can be completely in your right mind and still have the uttermost terror that you have ever felt in your life and just have the physiological responses to it.
Yeah, your heart rate picks up and all the stuff that goes with that, and just being exhausted after because you've expelled your energy.
That is the best way I've heard it put in a very, very long time, of just your worst fear manifesting itself. Just that really is just how it feels all the time. Like, I get shaky. I don't know how you react to it. I'd love to know if I have physical tics where I start tapping each of my fingers in sequence and shaking, and pretty much I've actually done the rocking back and forth, because even though knowing there's nothing else I can do, it wasn't even soothing. I just couldn't do anything else. I just had to be moving in some capacity.
So I'm trying to understand, and I don't mean to rehash anything.
Oh, no.
But what you described sounds to me kind of like an anxiety attack. Am I wrong there? Or is an attack something different than your everyday anxiety?
For me, the attacks are different. I'm having an anxiety episode sometimes where it's my heart rate is up, I'm feeling a little bit anxious, antsy, I guess, just kind of nervous and as though, on edge. And I know that I shouldn't be. I can calm down. When I'm having a full-on panic attack, I can't breathe. I can't function. I can't have a conversation. I am completely shut down, probably sitting in the floor or in the dark or yelling. A lot of mine manifests with anger more than anything else. Whenever I'm having any kind of trigger, I get angry at everything. Where for an attack, the first time I ever had a panic attack, I thought I was dying. I felt like I was having a heart attack. My chest hurt. I started sweating, and I thought that, okay, it's the middle of the night. I'm going to go set my alarm, and if I die in my sleep, I'm going to go to sleep, and if I die in my sleep, my alarm will wake me up, and everything will be good. And at that moment, I realized it was completely irrational, that's not what happens if you die in your sleep, and I realized it was a panic attack, and I wasn't actually having a heart attack. But for me, they're two completely separate things, and I'll have minor episodes with small tics, triggers, things like that, and then where, it will take over a small portion of my life, and then at some point I'll have a major attack where it's just, I'm done. I cannot function anymore until that is over.
So I picked you two for the episode specifically because I've watched and listened to you create content, and from your demeanors, I would never guess that you struggle with this. Really, I mean, you guys, I picture somebody with anxiety as somebody who won't come out of a room, right?
Right.
But you both seem very outgoing. What do you attribute this to, and does your anxiety make content creation more difficult?
For me, my demeanor, I get that a lot, actually. At work, I recently had a couple of people ask me when I was having one of my worst anxiety periods of the last maybe year, looked at me and seriously said, "Why are you always so happy? Are you ever sad? Does anything ever go wrong for you?" Because when I'm out and around people, I'm on. I have a smile on my face. I'm happy. They've joked around and said that I'm Willy Wonka of my college just because I'm bouncing and spinning and laughing and having fun all the time. Just because I have anxiety episodes and anxiety doesn't mean that it changes my base personality. I'm a happy, optimistic, try to be nice person to people, And sometimes I just get mad. Sometimes I get scared. Sometimes I have these things. It doesn't make content creation more difficult for me at all. It has recently. I haven't put out any of my Geek Fitness podcasts lately because of the medication changes have made it where I can't focus. That you talk about going and spending all of my energy. Once we get finished recording here, I'm going to go collapse so hard for being up for doing this, just because that's the way that it is. It makes the physical part of actually doing it harder to do. But for me, I'm a fairly outgoing person anyway, so it's just another thing that, to deal with, I suppose. I don't know. It doesn't make it more difficult for me, other than, like I said, just the actual act of creation. I don't want to do it less or anything like that.
It sounds like you burn twice as bright but half as long almost.
Yeah, really. For me, that's a lot of the way that it is for me, which is why they thought it was bipolar, because I would have lots of swings up and down because of that, because I would go so hard juggling 5-6 different projects at once, then completely burn out, spend all of my energy, and pretty much like I would take naps in the middle of the floor for 3 hours in the middle of the afternoon just because I had no energy to get anywhere else.
So Andang, hail and well met. I know you're also very upbeat in your videos, and that's a big part of why people love to tune into what you put out there on your YouTube channel. Same question for you, I guess.
Right, and I've gone through a lot of the same stuff that he just described. I should mention that in the last probably 4 years or so, I've not had anywhere near as much anxiety, and we can get into why that's the case later. But, back to what he said, it does kind of take over you, and it's hard to be, I have a very outgoing personality as well, just normally. I started to notice as time went on, there started to be certain symptoms that I noticed, and as that happened, I got less and less outgoing. Oh. Until I had this huge crash my junior year where I was basically pretty much incapacitated for like a month. Coming out of that, I've kind of built myself back up to being outgoing again. But yeah, I was very secluded for that month in particular, especially, and leading into that and coming out of it, and just had social anxiety for quite a bit for no reason. And I knew that there was absolutely no reason. And like family was fine, but going out of the house sometimes was even hard, which sounds completely crazy. But when you have your absolute worst fear as your body's feelings that you're feeling, and you have like a complete, like almost, panic attack, almost at the level of a heart attack because of how fast your heart's beating, it starts to make you shake, and all the stuff that he described, it can be incredibly hard to overcome that because your body's telling you the exact opposite of what your brain knows.
All right, so anxiety is somewhat of an overused word nowadays, just like, maybe people who say that they're depressed, people say they're anxious. I mean, because everybody has these types of feelings of nervousness. It's always been that way. When somebody gets up in front of people to do public speaking or whatever, that's one of the things that tends to make people really anxious or nervous. So when you hear people using these words in kind of that context, more like everyday nervousness, the things that everybody experiences, what do you feel when you hear that? Being somebody who's been actually diagnosed with a condition of anxiety.
For me, it's every once in a while I'll hear somebody say something like that where they're, oh my goodness, I'm just so depressed lately. And I'm like, are you really? And I never really fully understood what depression was until I read the webcomic Hyperbole and a Half. And one of my friends shared it with me. I was like, this is the best representation of what depression feels like in the world. And I read it, and it pretty much was that if you guys haven't read that, I really suggest looking it up. That I think her name is Allie Broche who writes it. And it really is just that feeling of nothing that you feel, that emotional numbness. And then after I read that, I'd never really experienced it myself. And then afterward, when I had those moments where I was just lying in the floor, unable to do anything, I looked back and then I heard people say all that kind of stuff. And it's just, I can't say what they're experiencing. I don't. I don't want to say, maybe you are depressed, maybe you are anxious and nervous, and that is the worst that you felt, and so I want to empathize with that. But I have felt it be much worse. When my dad died, I had people come up to me and being like, I know how you feel, and I had a really hard time of not saying, no, you don't. You have no idea how I feel right now. And I just realized at that point it was they're trying. And that's kind of how it is when somebody says, I'm so depressed lately, or I'm anxious, and somebody's like, oh, you just need to get over it, or that kind of thing. It's like, well, at least they're trying. That's what that person's experiencing right then. And I don't want to diminish that for them. That if that is what they're feeling, then that's what they're feeling.
Yeah, I want to explore that a little bit since you hit on it, because there are people on the other side of things who really do want to empathize with you,
right?
Who want to be able to make you feel better, who want to help out the situation. Having a father, a parent, or a close relative dies is a really good, I think, illustration of that, where people want to tell you that they know how you feel when maybe they don't at all. And I think some people realize that they don't, and they don't know what to say,
Yeah. And there's nothing good to say in a situation like that, or when someone is depressed or anxious and you're dealing with it. And dealing with that at my dad's funeral made me be way more careful with the words that I chose. And it's strange that I'm an English teacher, I'm trained in words, but it took something like that to make me actually realize the power that they had on somebody. Because when somebody came up and said, I'm really sorry, BJ, and I'm like, yeah, me too. And I just kind of looked at them and I was like, excuse me, I need to go compose myself. And just excuse myself right then, that I was like, man, I'm taking all of this, they're trying. Mm-hmm. And it's just really hard. So whenever something bad is happening, somebody's like, I'm so anxious about this. That's when I start talking to them about things that my counselor said to get through it, or, Kimmy Schmidt saying you can deal with anything for 10 seconds, that I can't say that they're not feeling that, because I've had those moments where somebody said they knew what I was feeling and I knew they didn't. So I don't want to diminish anybody else's.
So Andang, have you noticed these terms kind of being casually thrown around? And what do you think when you hear somebody say, boy, I'm really anxious about this, or I've got. You could even go to other disorders like I've got ADD about this, or something, and or OCD. That's a big one now too.
Yeah.
Well, I just hope that they don't ever actually go through what I've been through, because it's so horrible. I've had mono. I've had some not like the worst stuff, but I've had pretty bad stuff. As far as sicknesses and things like that, because when you're anxious, your sicknesses actually go up, chances for that. Right. And a panic attack is by far the worst thing I've ever experienced. And I hope nobody ever has to go through the type of anxiety that I've had to deal with. They can say whatever they want. I know what I've been through, and I hope that that's not what they're referring to when they say that.
Andang, you made an interesting point when we were talking about planning this show out, that I think we should probably touch on here. You said, there's a lot of people in the entertainment industry, especially comedians, who do suffer from these type of disorders that you would never have thought they would. Why do you think that is? Are they using humor as a coping mechanism? Are they using, I want to say, mild narcissism for actors or something, as kind of a coping mechanism? Or what's the deal? Is there really a correlation here?
I think that's definitely part of it. I feel like, there's always that stereotype statement that said that, like comedy comes from a really dark place. So I think that, you have to be able to laugh through really tough stuff. So anxiety is just part of that. And it's really sad just how many comedians have very severe anxiety disorders, even in just like the stuff I do, like the podcast and other stuff like that. There's a lot of people on the Players Alliance that deal with heavy anxiety and stuff like that. And there's people in past kinships I've had in Lotro and all sorts of stuff that have heavy anxiety. And I don't know if it's just that it's that prevalent, and for whatever reason in the online format people feel more apt to actually talk about it, or if somehow this online format allows people who have like social anxiety be able to function more in an online capacity.
Yeah, I've wondered about that myself because social anxiety is not something that I really deal with. And so I've wondered that about online communities letting people get that interaction and deal with that a little bit, that if it becomes easier that way. Because I've noticed things like with friends who deal with massive social anxiety, that they're really involved in, say, Tumblr or communities like that, where they find a like-minded community and really dive deep into it. That because that's not something I know very much about. I've thought the same thing, that there are a lot of people out there who tend to do that.
Yeah, and kind of following along that line, we're going to tie this back into gaming now, because you're both gamers, and I've
Right.
met a lot of gamers as well who kind of struggle with anxiety. Very, very similar parallel there. People who are gamers who sit, behind a screen and sit at a keyboard and mouse, and people who are doing the same thing, creating content or interfacing with Tumblr or whatever. So does interfacing with others through medium of gaming, you think, help with anxiety?
Yeah, a lot. For me, it really, really helps over the summers when I'm off work. That it's something that I moved to a new town a couple of years ago where all of my friends are over an hour away, and they're busy with their lives as well. But being a teacher, I'm pretty much off to do side projects or work on whatever I want during the summer months. And online is a wonderful way for me to get social interaction and do that. That it really does help a great deal. That gaming and being able to play online games during those months really helps my mental health and puts me in a much better mindset to pretty much do everything.
I went through a friend transition about the same time that I started playing Lotro. And Lotro came around right when I needed other friendships and things like that. And so I got really, really deep into Lotro one summer and just really, talked with my kinship. And for that summer, they were my best friends. And, just talked about everything under the sun with them. And most of the times we didn't even really talk about Lotro. We were just playing the game. And we're talking about, all these other things. And we're having, normal conversations that friends would have. And it was just nice to be able to have that in the comfort of my own home.
There's also a flip side to these online interactions. We've talked about probably on other podcasts before, but I was wondering if you guys think this could also be harmful in some way to your anxiety or to whatever condition that you might have that causes social difficulties. So the couple of things I thought of was, possibly people avoiding face-to-face interactions, which I think all agree are important.
Right.
Or also maybe even diving into these communities that are a bit toxic.
Well, I was actually thinking about this, and for people who get really caught up in the online side of things and stay at home for a long time and don't ever go outside, they can have major issues because your anxiety makes you more likely to actually get sick from stuff because your body's so worn out from having to worry all the time that you'll be more likely to get a sickness. And if you're not going outside to get like vitamin C and stuff like that from the sun, then you're actually much more likely to get sick. And so I know people who have dealt with anxiety that just get sick all the time because all they do is just stay inside and talk with their friends, and they never go out and, do other things that allows them to start recovering as well. And so they just stay in this constant cycle of getting sick over and over and over and over again. And it seems like it's just because all they do is just stay inside all day. And so I think you have to find some type of a balance.
Actual physical ramifications for this anxiety disorder. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I've had friends who were playing World of Warcraft so much that they ended up developing clots in their legs that we were raiding for such long periods of time that we had to start taking breaks for them to be able to get up and just walk around their house according to their doctor's orders. And for me, I've never dealt with that. I mean, I've dealt with I have a very addictive personality, where one of the things I'm dealing with my counselor and psychiatrist right now is actually determining what that stems from. Because whether it's, some sort of minor OCD that involves control issues and really deep dives, if it's bipolar 2, or if it is predominantly impulsive ADHD, which actually makes you focus more on one thing than jumping around. And for me, it manifests in just being addicted and just diving super deep into one thing. And I did this with World of Warcraft after I graduated college. That I didn't move home. I graduated. I was depressed and didn't know that's actually what it was. I told my girlfriend, who lived about 3 hours away, don't come see me this summer. I just want to stay here and play my game with my friends. And I would wake up at about 9 o'clock in the morning, play WoW for a couple of hours, go to lunch with my friends. Then we would come back to my house, have basically 4 computers set up in one of my rooms, and basically run dungeons together all into the night until dinner time, then come back and do it until the late hours of the morning. That was roughly my entire day, was playing Warcraft and sitting in one place and being with my friends. And I didn't see that anything was wrong with it, that I thought, oh, I'm just doing this because I'm enjoying it. And, much later now, I got married, and we're still dealing with this, that when it comes to online interactions, that I have to be very careful on how I allot my time. That Jennifer will say to me, maybe you need to think about the amount of time you're spending on this game. And it's not in a controlling way. It's in a, you disconnect from everything else when this happens. You've seen it negatively affect your life and your mood and your relationships. We just need to be aware of it. So being aware of it is a really big thing for me, and just being super self-aware is something I've had to become in order to not become a shut-in.
So it sounds like, your wife gets it, and it's really good that she's around. Do you guys find that surrounding yourself with the right people is important to help you kind of in those situations where you're starting to go down the rabbit hole, or you're starting to have – can they actually help kind of pull you out of that?
Yeah. I may have mentioned this earlier, and I can't remember. It ran through my head, but I have a friend who said that you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and that's really stuck with me. That I went through a friend transition like that as well, Andang, and the people I associate with now are much more healthy for me. That the people I spend my time with online and in person really, really make a big difference in how my anxiety goes. That doing the podcast with Void has really affected not only my hobbies, I'm playing more video games now, but I feel like I have somebody to go to when I have an issue that I can just vent to, and a friend, more than, just sitting in my room or sitting in my office, lying on my back, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to Dashboard Confessional and crying. I mean, It's having people around who understand makes a big difference to me.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have somebody that you can talk to with anxiety in particular, I think, because it's such a mental issue that you really need to be able to talk through the issues so that you can actually overcome it. And I've found that, just naming the fact that you have anxiety actually helps you deal with it, and realizing that, okay, this is anxiety that I'm experiencing right now, helps you to be able to deal with it more effectively.
And one thing doing that is recognizing that there's nothing that you can do about it for that moment, that you're in your right mind, that you can recognize, or at least I can. I recognize that my body is reacting in a way that my mind finds illogical. That I can look at, my heart rate spiking, me shaking, me dealing with this, and tell the people I'm around I'm having an anxiety response. I don't know what's going on. I know that nothing has come on. You guys haven't done anything. Just this is happening right now. Lets me realize and kind of center and be like, this is going to pass. This is a temporary situation for me. I just need to go into the back room and close my eyes for a second, or I need to remove myself from all of these people who are screaming or just something. And being able to say that's what's going on doesn't make it stop, but it makes me realize that maybe this one situation is transient.
Even for people who don't struggle with these types of issues, the internet and gaming, really, even specifically, can be a really toxic environment. I know, Andang, you play Lotro, which is usually a pretty even keel game, but you also play other things for your channel. And I know, Beej, you talked about playing Overwatch and things like that before.
Yeah.
For these types of very toxic environments, I'm not saying Overwatch is. That was just an example.
It is a lot of times.
Okay, well, so maybe it is. When people can be so cruel and so, I guess, unforgiving, and you know how, I could go through a whole list of adjectives, but it can get so bad sometimes that a person who doesn't struggle with anxiety can leave their computer feeling really, really bad. So I'm wondering if you guys had experience with any of these toxic type environments, and how do you deal with them, being that you have the additional hurdle to overcome of an anxiety disorder?
I get angry. That more than anything, I recognize that I have to remove myself from it, because Jennifer is the one who actually pointed this out. It's the reason I don't play World of Warcraft anymore, is because I would get so mad that she would just hear profanities coming from the other room when, we wipe on a boss or something doesn't go the way it's supposed to. And she asks me, are you having fun with that? And I've come in after a raid and I'm angry and I sit down on the couch like, oh, I wasted the last 5 hours of my life. And she's like, do you have fun doing that? And I'm like, yeah, I like doing raids. And she's like, it doesn't sound like you do. You're always angry and yelling, and it ruins your mood for the night after you're doing that. And it was that, realizing that, or when I get off of Overwatch when someone's told me to go kill myself because I picked a character they didn't want me to play. It's just, when I feel that anger, I just step away now. I'm aware of how it affects me. That a lot of mine comes in from reflection and seeing this causes this. And over years, I've been able to move just correlations away from it and say, okay, when someone does this on Overwatch or World of Warcraft, this happens, then I'm angry for 2 days afterward. Maybe I shouldn't be partaking in that particular community anymore.
Well, and for me, my anxiety doesn't manifest as anger, but I used to have kind of a big deal of, trying to fit in more, because with anxiety, you feel like you have this thing that is not normal, it seems anyway. And so you try to be able to fit in. And when people start to, electronically bully you, that can be challenging. And for me, in the more recent times, though, I've learned to just ignore people. Like, they're probably having a bad day. That doesn't mean I have to. I can just move on and, enjoy the rest of my day, and it doesn't really bother me. There was one time on my channel where somebody left a comment that kind of bothered me quite a bit, and I thought about maybe stopping content creation because of it for a short period of time. But I think that that's fairly normal, where, when somebody says stuff on the internet, it can just cause everyone to have just a lot worse day.
If I'm tracking your responses correctly, what I'm hearing is that it's key for you to kind of identify early that you're experiencing something. And the second part is you've actually found some coping mechanisms that you can put into place once you've identified that early to kind of help yourselves through the difficulties.
The coping mechanisms that I've developed come along with being aware that I'm still going to have bad days and feel like this, that I have to realize what caused it. That, somebody hits my car at the gas station, it's okay for me to get angry and upset and, do what I need to do and have my day ruined for it. That is a completely normal reaction that happens and that anybody would have, and that, you at that point, you can't stew all night long and sit there angry and brood about it. But whenever it's something where I'm sitting watching the Dick Van Dyke Show, and which I've been doing lately. I don't like old TV, but man, that show is funny. And I've never watched it before. And that's what I was doing before we got on here. And let's say I'm watching that, and all of a sudden my heart rate spikes up to 100 and 120. And I start shaking for no reason whatsoever because I'm watching, a black and white comedy show. That's when I realize, and I just get mad and be like, and I start thinking about things from work or that happened during the day or how somebody wronged me. It's like, nope. There is no reason for this. This is, you're projecting on something. And I try to focus in on that. I look at cause a lot on, okay, why am I feeling this way? Did something really go wrong? Is this a legitimate reaction, or is this a physiological reaction to your anxiety somehow?
Okay, guys, I think it feels like we're wrapping up here a little bit. I wanted to thank you both. I know this is a really personal topic, and I'm certainly happy to have you both on and opening up and hopefully helping some folks out there who may be struggling with some of the same things that you are. I'm going to go ahead and give you the last word. Is there anything that you'd like to leave folks with that might be starting to experience some of these things or have experienced these things for some time and don't know what to do about it?
Well, the main thing I would say is don't be ashamed of it. That I've over the last couple of years, I've realized and heard people kind of still talk about it as though there's a stigma to it. Even when I was going to get my counselor referred to by my primary care doctor, that the receptionist looked at me and was like, "And we'll call you when you're counselor," and whispered it. And I was like, I'm not ashamed of this, that I'm here to get help. You don't have to act as though there's something wrong that needs to be hidden.
That makes it worse, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes it a lot worse. It makes it, seem like there's something wrong with you to have to go do this when even the medical professionals are, and your counselor will be in contact with you. It's like, I'll tell just about anybody. I'm super open with it because I think people should be talking about it, that I'm so big into health that people ignore the health part of mental health. And that more than anything, just be aware of it, that if you think you might be feeling this way, then that's a valid response to be able to go and have them check it out, have somebody check it out, talk to somebody about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely go and seek out help, especially if you have panic attacks.
Yeah.
Or you are going through, a ton of stress and just constantly are realizing that. Or you're like maybe have social anxiety and are afraid to leave your home. That's probably a sign that you need to go and get help. And there's nothing wrong with having to do that. It can seem hard when you have that amount of anxiety. Just the thought of going to the doctor's office can even be a scary thing. And just getting over that and realizing that this is something that you need to do in order to get better so that you don't have to deal with this anymore is something that's very important.
Yeah, it's the very first couple of visits are super hard, and now it's just a part of my life. The scariness went away once it became routine.
As far as feedback goes, I got some feedback on Beyond Boss Fights episode 27 from Pasduel. That was the 2.5 year anniversary reunion where I had a whole bunch of people that had been on the podcast before, past guest hosts, send in 5-minute thoughts of what they're doing now, and had a really fun time kind of reuniting on a reunion with so many people that had been on the show. Andang, you were on there, so thanks for your recording. You gave me an award. Appreciate that.
Oh.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to do that, Brax. It was a lot of fun, and if anybody's not listened to that episode, I highly recommend it. It's probably my favorite episode of Beyond Boss Fights.
Thank you. Pastuel says, lovely episode, made me realize how nice it is to hear the actual voices of people I know well from reading blogs and Twitter, but don't often hear speaking. Also, nice insight into your life as a podcaster. I think that's because I took from episode 1 all the way to whatever we had done at that point, 26, I guess, and kind of gave a little story behind each one as what I remembered about doing it and the progression of the show and stuff, which was kind of fun for me to do. I had a 5-star review on iTunes from somebody named The Void 19. Wonder who that is.
Oh, I hear that guy's just awful.
Well, he gave me
terrible.
He gave me 5 stars, so I'm not going to say anything like that. But he did say, I love every time this podcast shows up in my feed, and I can't wait for more. That, of course, is Void from the Geek to Geek podcast, co-host with Beej on that show. And
yeah, that was a joke. He's fantastic.
He is a great guy. Proprietor of the Geek to Geek podcast network, a whole network. Who'd be crazy enough to do that?
Crazy people.
You can send your feedback to braxwolf@gmail.com, and I'll read it on the podcast. Just a reminder that Beyond Boss Fights is on iTunes and would appreciate all of your ratings and reviews. Beyond Boss Fights is also on Stitcher and Player FM, so please add it to your playlists and enjoy. As far as the guests go, for your contact information, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Andang. How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, well, they can always hit me up on Twitter at AndangLP. And I pretty much tweet about everything there, so you should have access to that. But if you're just looking for even more, then you can head over to my website, pvmpandang.com, and you can find all my stuff there too.
And before we move on, I did want to mention Middle Earth lore, because I know that we hit a milestone on our last episode, and we should be expecting a new one pretty soon, shouldn't we?
Yeah, September 12th should be episode 4 of Middle Earth Lore coming out, so lots of fun. Looking forward to that episode on Rivendell.
Yep, I'm looking forward to it too. Beej, how about you? How can people get a hold of you?
Like him, I am on Twitter all the time as @Professor Beej. I blog and podcast about fitness on geekfitness.net, and I sell some pretty awesome science fiction books at bjkeaton.com.
That's right. Oh, and if you haven't listened to the Geek to Geek podcast where Beej talks about any of his authoring stuff or getting his stories turned into audiobooks, those are fascinating for me. I had no idea the process behind any of that stuff.
And the third one's coming out soon, and one of the voices he did got optioned. Like, he was contacted by a video game studio who wanted him specifically for one of the voices he did for my books that he tweeted me about. So once I find out what game it is, I'm so playing that just to be able to hear the narrator of my books do one of my characters' voices as a character in a video game. Very roundabout, but going to be very awesome.
As for me, you can always follow me on Twitter @Braxwolf. That's BRAXWOLF. You can email me at braxwolf@gmail.com. I'm on a Nook, Facebook, YouTube, but you can always find all my stuff at my blog at braxwolf.com. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into this important episode, and we will see you next time.
I developed a radio, like a lounge lizard voice that I did when I did it like this. Like, hey guys, you're listening to BJ and Kids on the Square. And I was doing this, and I said that one day, and then my wife just kind of looked at me and was like, you had a radio show? Oh my God, how have I never heard this?